Pardon, I wasn't ready, man. I thought I could just plug everything in like I did last time, and I didn't test my audio, so I was all fucking cables all
All right.
crossed and whatnot.
We're live, by the way, so I'm going to start playing your intro.
Copy that.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible split sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening news and dance. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching
Okay, there we go. All right, and let me pull up your notes. Yeah, it looks like you've got a narrative, key characters. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff on there.
I didn't break it down into something very concise for you to be able to follow along with too well. So I beg your pardon if it it has everything that I had been working on for this particular talk.
Oh shit. Okay, so you got like 20 pages on here.
Yeah, it's
Okay, this is everything that you've been doing.
this is the plan for the conversation today. Yeah.
Oh, just for today. Wow. Okay.
We're probably not going to get to all of it, but this is the groundwork and framework that I was hoping to work with.
Yeah, I figured everybody. I'm looking at the chat and people were immediately thinking about American History X. That's what I thought of when I heard this. All right. Um, I guess let's go. Whatever you want to start with, and I'll try not to interrupt until I've got a question.
All right. So to get a ball rolling, I wanted to talk today about Esther and Haman, which is a story from the Book of Esther, and it provides some context and framework for the further discussions that we'll be participating in today. And by covering this, we'll get an understanding of why there's been apprehension towards the people of Israel in the past, the idea that there was contention among Jews and the people of the neighboring areas prior to this exact instance where some things transpired that caused more distrust forward. But we'll start with Esther and Haman. So Haman was a king's right hand man. He was a virtuous man, and his job was to advise the king. at the time, this is Persia, shortly after the the exile, um, pardon, shortly after the Jews were rescued by the Persians from Babylon. So the Persians have been taken, the Jews have been taken into Persia, and they've been allowed to live amongst the Persians. In the Bible, the king is known as King Ahasuerus, but according to certain ideas, Xerxes the first was the king at the time. So it is debated as to whether Xerxes the first was the actual king at the time, but there are scholars that believe this was the case. So Jews were not allowed to live within the city walls of the kingdom. In most places where Jews were accepted, they were forced to live on the outskirts of the kingdom, outside the city walls. This being a result of a reputation that they had developed. People were aware that they engaged in usury, they engaged in um, certain societal and religious practices that made them um, outsiders. And for this reason, they were placed in that particular place to prevent them from mingling or causing harm in the kingdom.
Okay.
So Esther was an orphan, and she was a Jewish woman. Her cousin was Mordecai.
Okay. I'm following along.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
Yeah.
So the king's wife had died, and he was looking for uh, a new wife. After dismissing his wife Vashti for disobedience, he was looking for a new queen. And after holding I wouldn't say it was somewhat of a search, but he came to know her. And under the advice of Mordecai, she concealed her identity as a Jew because, again, Jews had a reputation. So Haman, who was a trusted advisor to the king, his job was to maintain unity within the kingdom, to keep his ear to the ground and ensure that the kingdom operated smoothly. When he came to know of Esther, he was apprehensive to say the least, because he was an astute man, and he was rightly skeptical of the king's new wife. So,
I'm sorry. Did
no,
the
please.
did the Jews have like any kingdom at that point, or were they just basically roaming constantly?
So at this particular point in time, the Jews, I believe it was the kingdom of Judah and Benjamin, if I'm not mistaken. It was the two southern kingdoms were the ones which were taken into exile, because the 10 tribes were scattered after the Assyrian um the Assyrian exile, where they were taken into captivity about 250 years prior. So if it was the entire 12 tribes, I may be incorrect, but um, at this particular time, they are no longer in possession of a kingdom.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because I was just trying to think of if they had any kind of like nobility that um would be like, usually when somebody seeks out another person of no they in the kingdom, they seek out somebody of nobility. So that's why I was kind of curious about that. So this is
That's
just a
actually
normal person.
that's an interesting question because it is stated that she was an orphan. So she wasn't necessarily of noble blood. She wasn't a Cohen or a Levite. We'd call them Cohens these days if you adhere to that idea. But she wasn't of the priestly class, and she wasn't in any way associated with any royal lines in particular. So Hammond had a distrust of her from the get-go, and Mordecai told her to keep her motivations and um, her end goal to herself, and that the purpose of her making good with the king was to allow the Jews into the kingdom of Persia. So the sole purpose of her um, sleeping with the king and becoming his wife was to help the Jews obtain favor with the king.
Okay.
She
So
she
we're in the empire of Haman, and we've got Esther, who's kind of a commoner orphan, and the king is looking for a new queen. And
correct.
okay,
And he meets with probably quite a few women, but she manages to sink her claws into him, so to speak, and she seduces him. Um, as Sam Tripoli would say, Jews got that good
mm,
that good right.
you know how
But
much I
that,
hate when he
that
says
yeah,
that.
no, I know, and that's the reason why I included it. So with that said, she seduced him and she slept with him, and she by doing so um gained favor with him. And at the same time, Hammond begins a deep distrust of this woman, begins developing a deep distrust of this woman. And he decides that he should build a set of gallows to deal with the the problem that is going to arise in the near future because he believes that these people plan on usurping the king and causing chaos in the kingdom. So he begins construction of the gallows, and he begins engaging in conversation with the king and explains to him that the Jews plan on, as they always do, um, once allowed into the kingdom, they will cause chaos and eventually overthrow the king. So at the second banquet where Esther spends time with the king, she reveals her Jewish identity. This is a banquet that is held, and Haman is present at this time.
Okay.
And he he's already shared this particular information with the king that the Jews are planning on overthrowing him. But in a bit of a plot twist, Esther tells the king that she is a Jew and that Haman is targeting her people, and that in order to maintain control over his kingdom, he must kill Haman. Because not only does Haman want to persecute the Jews, he wants to take over the kingdom. His goal is to usurp the king himself.
It's kind of interesting. I was just kind of looking at the timeline of today, and it's very similar to, especially relevant to that guy that Danny had on with the intermingling of Persia and Israelis or Jews. But all of it's kind of been backwards now, where it's princesses from Iran marrying commoner, well,
Dude,
businessmen, Israelis.
spot on. I was gonna briefly segue into that should we have the opportunity. Isn't that interesting? Where um, Jews and the, the people of Persia have been interloping for quite some time, and it's continuing to this day, as you just mentioned. So, as a result of her sway, she makes a statement. Let's look at this particular statement. But she she tells the king that Hammond and has to die and his people need to die, otherwise he's going to be overthrown. So as a result of this, Hammond is hanged, and I believe 10 of his sons are killed as well. And then doesn't necessarily specify how long after this transpired, but about 500 attackers. Um,
Oh, so there was like an uprising, like a full uprising when this happened, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay.
So so there were some people that tried to revolt against what was to come, were slaughtered, and Hammond's 10 sons were slaughtered. And then
I'm assuming they were defending Haman or Hammond.
Hammond, because he did have influence in the kingdom as not only the king's right hand man, but he was a righteous man. He was an honest man, and he had enough of a following that there was um, a bit of an uprising in a battle where 500 of his backers were slaughtered, as well as 10 of his sons. And throughout the empire, 75,000 Persians were murdered. And it didn't take long for the kingdom as it stood in that particular iteration of it to fall um, to the Jews and fall into disarray. And
How did they end up getting 75,000? You're saying this is a from the book of Esther in 9:16 in your notes that
correct.
75,000 enemies of the Jews were killed. These
So that is the biblical explanation of what transpired. that is not necessarily the historical. So this is where some people have contentions saying how did these Jews kill 75,000 Persians? But the idea being that Hammond knew, and as we do, the Jews are scattered among the nation. They are in every city, every state, every nation. And what they merely needed to do was initiate and set up the conflict so that when the time came, they began slaughtering all and every person that they could, just to inflict as much damage as possible on the kingdom.
Okay.
So this is an early case of Jews being welcomed into a country, being given um, safe harbor, and subsequently doing their best to eradicate the people that gave them an opportunity at putting down roots in their homeland.
Is this the first recorded one, or because you're saying that they had a reputation, so this is the
Their
first recorded?
their reputation being that they were at the time known for ritual child sacrifice and usury. These were the the two main things. The third being that they did not assimilate when they were taken in by a nation. They steadfastly held to their beliefs and their customs, and they never became um, people of that nation. They insisted on maintaining a degree of separation. That being one of the reasons that there was apprehension to begin with. I would probably say that as a leader, this was the most disconcerting to him. He probably didn't have much issue with usury or child sacrifice to a certain extent, knowing that these things were somewhat prevalent in in the world at the time,
So this is on
and that
the border of the is the Babylonians are still around, or they're done with, or then the border still with Iran or Persia.
I would I would believe that
It seems
when the Persians conquered Babylon, I assume Babylon fell, and
okay.
that's when they took the Jews in
Okay.
and freed the Jews.
So, and
So
we had talked about before also when you start taking in people to your religion, like it, like especially like with the Catholicism, where you start taking in these pagans, and the pagans morph your religion as well. Um, do you know if the Babylonians, because they had a lot of this similar ideals, also like a lot of the like the seraphim or kind of that same angel thing, how much of Jewish folklore or religion was built into their their religious
that's
views?
actually that is a very good question, and I'll just frame it in a slightly different manner. The Jews picked up many things from the Babylonians and practices, traditions, rites, and rituals. This is where we get the Babylonian Talmud. So the there's I believe it's the Jerusalem Talmud, which is a later um, rendition of the Talmud. I believe that's when the Talmud was first put into writing, if I'm not mistaken. But prior to that, it was known as the Babylonian oral history of uh, of the elders, or the Babylonian oral history of the Pharisees. This was teachings and practices, rites, rituals, and ways of living their life. For instance, according to modern Jewry, in order to be considered a Jew, you need to be at least 1/16th. So as long as you're 1/16th and the line was passed down through your mother, you are officially a Jew in their eyes. And these are some of the things that are discussed in the Talmud. There was another story in the Talmud about what if a Christian puts a piece of pork in the stew cauldron when no one's looking? If we take that piece of pork out, can we still eat the stew? And this is some of these things that Jews tend to engage in. It's legalese
Yeah.
and um hence their uh affinity for that particular profession. It's always been a big part of who they are and how they operate, to um engage in contracts, um and find ways of working around the laws that were given to them by Moses.
Yeah, hence the name Israel, wrestle with God.
Yeah, one who
Um,
he who wrestles with God, exactly.
but with for instance, I was thinking like because haggling is what like the Middle East is really known for. So was that something that was because that's kind of I don't know if you really consider that usury, but like is that common practice before them, or was that something that was kind of true to the entire areas already?
Well, haggling being um, a necessary part of bartering, I wouldn't necessarily say that being the crux of the issue, but they did engage in usury, and this is one of the early practices that they were taught or learned of when in Babylon. Some people speak of the Babylonian bankers, and there are old banking families that can trace their lineage back to the Assyrians and Babylonians. This is true if you look at the black nobility and some of the families involved, the Orsini, Aldobrandini, and um, some of the others that are associated with northern Italy and Venice and that particular time period. Uh, if you research those families, you'll find that they can trace their lineage back to Babylon.
Okay.
So so this practice of usury was a
Well, I'm
manner.
sorry. I don't want to
Go ahead.
interrupt you too much, but they can trace their lineage back because I thought all the Jews weren't able to trace themselves, at
I,
least.
I was I was speaking of the 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 banking families associated with the black nobility. I believe or Orsini being one of them. If if you dig into them a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, when I was doing my research, I found that they had the ability to trace their lineage back to Assyria and Babylon.
Okay.
But Jews, that's somewhat ambiguous and dubious where they can trace their family lineages back, particularly modern Jews. But they did learn of banking and usury when they spent their time in Babylon, and they uh, were quite fond of it. That being said, this is where, we find ourselves at the time of Jesus when he's in the temple, um, overturning the tables because the money changers and money lenders were engaging in business. And as we know, usury is a crime in the Bible, and it's strictly frowned upon by God. So, just for the sake of this particular conversation, I just wanted to briefly recap some of the things we had talked about previously in the last episode. We had discussed the influences that they had learned from the fallen angels, such as building weaponry, engaging in murder and killing blows. These are some of the things that they practiced when they were in Persia: deceit, lies, and subterfuge. Not only did they learn those things, but they learned the practices of enchantments from Semyaza, and the ability to put those into practice. One of the ways that um, people give offerings to gods and false gods was through blood, as we know. And throughout history, this has been a common practice. And this is somewhat controversial in certain circles. In my opinion, it's more of a matter of fact. Jews would call the act blood libel. I would call it Jewish ritual murder. And this practice often involved children. And the manner in which they perform this act is a practice called exsanguination. And exsanguination is bloodletting. It's draining the individual of their blood to the point that they die. And this blood was used for ritual magic. The blood was baked into their unleavened bread and eaten, something we call matzah today. And they also used it for
So that's where that comes from, where they would make their matzah with blood.
yes, sir.
Okay.
And they would also perform rituals on Purim, which is a holiday that's meant to actually celebrate this instance of what transpired in Persia. I forget the exact translation of Purim, but Purim is a celebration of them defeating Haman and and essentially um, their disruption of what transpired in the Persian Empire at the time. They have a cookie or a pastry called Ozenhamen or Hammenstaschen or something along those lines in German.
Yeah, that's what Slav just said is Hamanstaschen cookies.
Yeah, and it literally means Haman's ear. So they're eating Haman's ear, and they say it's because it's a symbol of Haman speaking into the king's ear, but I see it more as cannibalistic. But that's so the 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 Jewish practice of ritual murder and exsanguination has been detailed throughout history, but I'd like to just mention a few cases for the sake of laying some groundwork to help people understand
Stay a little
again
closer to the mic if you could.
uh, why Jews were distrusted throughout Europe, and we'll we'll start in Gloucester. So, according to Monumenta Germania Historica Scriptoris, Volume 6, page 520.
Okay, I'm right there.
Yeah, so we try and get detailed if we can, whenever possible. Um, Jews ritually murdered a child by the name of Harold. His body was found in a river with wounds characteristic of a crucifixion. So his body had deep puncture wounds and lacerations, and the wounds were consistent with being nailed to a cross. His blood had been drained from his body, which is in line with the Jewish practice of exsanguination. And sources say that the child was tortured to death during the process. Nails were driven between his hands and feet. Um, they attempted to, in a haphazard, half-assed manner, dispose of the body. They don't believe in burying these individuals, so that they're often caught doing this, as a result of which they often just dump the body outside of town somewhere, or they dump it in a well or in a river or a ravine. And there's sources and references which substantiate this. Um, the Polychronion by R. Higdon and the Chronicles by R. Grafton support these claims. So there were no individuals who happened to be held accountable as a result of this instance, but this is just one of the many that we're going to discuss as we lay this groundwork. In 1181, so this is 21 years later, both these instances are in England. And for the sake of this, I'm not going to get into every instance in which this transpires, but I'm getting into the ones that happen to have a few more details related with them. So in 1181 in London, um, again around Easter, these instances always occur, um, most prevalently around Purim and around Easter, or Passover for the Jews. So near the church of Saint Edmund in London, Jews murdered a child named Rhodorus, or Robert. It can also be translated. Um, Not many details are given about the child's age, um, the the murder or the aftermath, but the timing of it being around Easter and in close proximity um, to a Christian church gave the people who were of the
Oh,
community
I'm sorry. That guy that just fucking murdered that guy, that those pastors, or was trying to murder a bunch of pastors. He was
he
just
crucified them.
he
Yeah,
crucified him, and I believe he slit his throat, didn't he?
and he also
Let him out.
put a crown of thorns. His head. He let him out. That's this is what they do.
And he had it said Yahweh on his neck, right? Isn't that?
Correct.
But why? I'm sorry, I don't want to go too far into it, but he had Yahweh on his neck. Aren't you not allowed to have tattoos as a Jew?
Yes,
Okay.
Jews don't don't tattoo themselves. I believe you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have tattoos, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, it doesn't change the fact that he was working for Satan in his acts. He knew what he was doing. There are Jews who believe that Yahweh is um, more or less Saturn, um, uh, a thunder god, or some uh, scholars called it El. That's why you see Samael, Raphael, El being like God.
That's number
And
one, right?
yeah, correct, correct. And so just because he has Yahweh on his neck doesn't necessarily mean that he was uh, a follower of God. They
Can I say something? So
please.
the you talk a lot. Well, you've mentioned a few times that what's his name, Brzezinski, about the schizophrenics, and there's also that trope about Jews having a predilection to schizophrenia as well. Do you think, and this is, you know, being very, how can I say it? Uh, I guess nice in saying that if they've got this demon in them, are they, there's part of them that's still human then, and that you're, that is your hate for it, you know, if you're trying to battle a Satan or the serpent seed inside of them, is there a part that you recognize as being like a victim of circumstances? Because, like, I don't know, like, do you think these people are in their fully right mind to be,
Mm,
because they're possessed by
that,
this, they're like they're vessels for an evil?
that's actually a great question. And when you consider that when Moses, I believe it was Moses, talked to God, and I forget what question he asked him, because he had given him I believe the commandments, and I think Moses said something along the lines of like, who are you? And God says, I am who I am, or more or less like Yahweh, Yahweh, or the the letters that became, they're actually consonants. There are no vowels in it. Um, essentially mean it was God responding, I am who I am. Like he's telling him, I'm the one. There is no other God above me. I'm the guy. I am who I am. But Jews took that and they write his name down as at least when transcribing it, as Yahweh, but they they don't believe in even speaking um his name. Uh Jews, according to certain legends, like one of the only ways they can do it is if they're crossing a river. They're allowed to whisper it into each other's ears because the sound of the water covers it up. But I believe it's more or less that they're afraid of the name of God, and they prefer not to speak it because it has power over them, and um, they don't want to be beholden to him. So
I'm just
the
thinking about that. Sorry if I look
no,
blank.
please, the 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 Jewish practice of ritual murder is quite old, and it's even found among, I briefly mentioned on the previous episode, the Timucua in Florida, a group of individuals who have close proximity to the Seminoles being uh, name origin Semite, Seminole, and they have the practice of taking babies and bashing their heads on rocks, which is something you actually saw recently in an airport where a Belarusian Jewish man picked up a small child and bashed it against the floor.
I did not see that, and I don't really want to go looking for it.
No, no, I just happen to have that particular algorithm where
Jesus.
yeah, those particular things pop up for me. But so in 1181 in London, Rhodorus or Robert, as he could also be known, uh, was murdered near the Church of St. Edmund in London. And the sources suggest that the body was mutilated with cuts and wounds to drain the blood for ritual purposes, specific or correlating with exsanguination. Um, the child's body was left near the church, um, possibly as a bit of a provocative act, some may interpret. Again, there's no details on the numbers of perpetrators or legal outcomes, but it's another instance in which a child was ritually murdered and exsanguinated. 1244, St. Benedict's churchyard in London. The corpse of a boy was found with cuts and scratches in several places. He also had Hebrew characters carved into him. He had been tortured and killed, blood had been drained, and the Christians who had any influence in the community decided to round up some Jews who had been baptized, and they forced them to interpret the Hebrew signs, being they didn't understand them. They coerced them and asked them, demanded that they translate. And what they found was the name of the child's parents carved into them, and read that the child had been sold to the Jews when it was very young. Uh, some Jews left the city as a result of this in secret. Jews of influence and uh, affluence decided to leave because they could feel that there was a heat coming down on them. So just 11 years later in Lincoln, there's the ritual murder of a child who would go on to be known as Saint Hugh of Lincoln, and that Henry III um, actually put the individuals who came to be known responsible to death at I believe 91 um, Jews were round up and eventually 11 or sorry 18 were executed. So to get into some of the details, and again, pardon me if some of this stuff is a little bit rough on the ear and hard to hear. I know it's not exactly a fun listen to some of this stuff, but it's necessary for laying some of this groundwork. So the Hugh was 8 years old. He was abducted by Jews around June 29th and held for 10 days to prepare for a ritual crucifixion. Um, the sources claim that Jews from various English cities gathered. It wasn't just the people of Lincoln. This is how we get the idea that 91 Jews were rounded up and interrogated for this particular crime. So Hugh was whipped. He was given a crown of thorns, um, spikes piercing his scalp. He had wounds on his head as a result of which he was given cuts all over his body, lacerations, usually for the purpose of draining blood. He was crucified. Nails were driven through his hands and feet. They pierced his side with a lance. So essentially, they gave him the Jesus treatment. And after his death, his body was disemboweled and his internal organs were removed. And the body had been thrown into a well where it was discovered on August the 27th or 29th, according to sources, and it's bloated, disfigured.
Does that have anything to do with the idea of that rumor of Jews poisoning wells? Is that any? It's a separate thing, or is that like them giving people botulism through?
No, I very much believe that there is a correspondence between the two because one of the manners in which they would more than likely poison a well would just you throw a dead body in that water and you ruin the water source.
Yeah, that's what they would do.
Um,
Is like put in like the aqueducts or like the running water. They would put like dead cows' bodies, or
correct.
when they would attack civilizations, they'd throw like nasty old dead corpses into
Correct.
the place.
They weren't necessarily harvesting apricot pits and making arsenic. They were just throwing rotten corpses into the water sources. Um, so according to the book Close Rolls of the Realm, um, Henry III claims that Copin confessed under torture, admitting to the ritual murder. Um, Again, 91 Jews were arrested and 18 were executed by hanging. And I thought it was kind of nice that they left their bodies out for everyone to see. But these are some of the cases that transpired in England. So there's also some instances that transpired um, in other places. Uh, One of the more famous of incidents is Simon of Trent. I believe we briefly glossed over this, but he was a 2-year-old Christian boy and the son of a tanner. He went missing in the city of Trento in Italy on March the 23rd, 1475, which coincided with Passover and the Holy Week leading up to Easter. And his disappearance occurred on a Thursday, and days later on Easter Sunday, his body was discovered in in a sewer or a water ditch um, near the house of a Jewish resident um, in the Jewish quarter of Trento, a man by the name of Samuel. Um, the autopsy had shown that he had been tortured and again exsanguinated. And as we know, these practices occur on Purim and in and around Passover. To this day, Jews use a chicken on Passover, and yep, swing it around their head, and they place their sins of the year onto the chicken. And truth is,
Is
the
it
only
dead or
reason
alive?
they cut the chicken's throat, and then when they're swinging it around, there's blood flying from the chicken.
Oh, that's nice.
So maybe they drain it first. They probably drain it first,
I
so
can't
there's not a lot
imagine
of
too
blood.
many Jewish mothers tolerating blood all over the house from the
Well, they do
chicken.
it. There's some video that I've seen where Orthodox Jews, they have a cup of blood and they are all standing in line, and each person walks up and the rabbi rubs it on the sides of their garments, and some of them will take it on their face as well, but they rub it on the left and right side of their garments where those little tassels are that they wear. And this, if I'm not mistaken, is performed for Passover. So I believe they drain the blood from the chickens and use the chickens for that ritual.
Yeah, that's pretty
So
gruesome.
yeah, it's um, the only reason they're doing it with chickens is they can't get their hands on a human. So in the Talmud, there is a particular passage. I can't recall its exact location, whether it's Sanhedrin this or blah 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 that. But it's if a Jew finds himself having the urges to commit a crime, he should go to another city where he is not known and commit it there.
I've heard that one.
So um, that said, um, Samuel is is rounded up as a result of what's discovered when they find the body. And again, they tortured him a little bit, but this was common practice back then. So for like modern Jews in the ADL would say, "Oh, these are blood libels. These people were tortured. They only gave these confessions under duress."
Okay,
Um,
I was just about to say that.
I would like to um, say otherwise,
And
being
before we get too far, so like we're about in the timeline. I was starting to think about this also is a lot of the witch trials, all the stuff. Is there any correlation, or is that like more of like just kind of in the same timeline line, but that's a different culture where they were like accusing people of witchcraft and stuff like that? Because they never really, whenever you're in high school or whatever, you're learning about the witch trials or how they dunk a witch and all this shit. They never really say, they kind of just chalk it up to like paganism or pagan beliefs, but they don't. I, it sounds very similar to a lot of the accusations.
and that's what I would say. I would say that it's fair to say that maybe some of these Christian families, quote unquote Christian families that had gone to the New World, um, were not truly Christian, and that they were engaging in Satan worship. And if that was the case, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I wasn't saying like the Salem witch trials. I was thinking more of like actually like medieval Europe and just like I would always see these books when I was younger and they would depict like some like weird device that they had that would dunk you in the water,
Hmm.
and like that was in Europe or medieval Europe and England when I was like learning about castles and stuff.
Well, people like Eric Watson, our friend from the Low Value Mail Chat, he's a pagan. So he would tell you that this was the result of um, the the Holy Catholic Church or the Roman Church or the Church of England forcing um, religion on the people to eradicate paganism. That's what certain people would say. Um, I believe that these particular practices were, I don't want to say prevalent in the world at the time, but they occurred. And there I'm sure there were families that held on to old pagan beliefs and still believed in offering sacrifices to their gods, and that they would occasionally get caught, and as a result of which be publicly hung, drawn, and quartered, or drawed, quartered, and hung, however you want to put that. But
And this and the other thing too is this kind of like as we started out and around Persia all the way up to England around, we're now in 1400s. Like this kind of coincides with some of the migratory patterns of what I remember of like the barbarians or the people kind of creating England. I'm a little fuzzy on like who started England, but wasn't like a lot of these practices are very like barbarian or barbar or like very like much like the Viking kind of stuff as well. So
and I had thought about including some of those things when discussing England and the Jews, and so they were officially expelled after a few times in 1290. Um, but they had been um, in the country since 1066 after William the First's conquest, and they were engaging in usury from the get-go. And one of the early um, founders of what would become the Kingdom of England. So, mind you, at this particular time, um, King Offa of Mercia, there was, I believe, Mercia, the Northumberland or Umberland Empire. Then I believe it was the Franks to the south, if I'm not mistaken. So England hadn't yet been united, but King Offa had established one of the first monetary systems in England, and it involved silver, with a pound divided into 240 pennies. 240 pennies, which is where we get um, the term sterling. Okay. And in 787, Offa prohibited usury, and later kings reinforced this prohibition. Kings like Alfred, who reigned between 865 and 899, and as well as Edward the Confessor. who reigned from 1042 to 1066. And as I stated, Jews began arriving in England after 1066, after William I's conquest, and immediately began practicing usury. So it says that within about 120 years, they had controlled significant parts of the land. The reason for this being is they charged, as we discussed in the previous episode, they had 30% tax on noble lands and 300% tax on tradesman tools. So if you were an apprentice, you essentially took out a 30-year mortgage you could never pay off because 300% is astronomical, and you'd be more or less indebted um, for the majority of the years that for which you could work to pay it off. So Mercia was bound by the rivers Trent and Mersey to the north, the Thames Valley to the south, Wales to the west, and East Anglia and Essex in the east. So those are the other kingdoms that were around at the time before the unification of England. So after the influx of Jews, um, I believe it was Aaron of Lincoln, if I'm not mistaken. Aaron of Lincoln had amassed so much money that he had surpassed the king in his wealth. So the reason that they began arriving after William the First's defeat of King Harold at Hastings is because they had financed the invasion, um, and they were given royal protection to practice usury. So as I stated, within 2 generations, 1/4 of the English lands were in Jewish hands, and this is also where we get the one of the first documented cases of coin clipping, um, at least in Western Europe. I'm sure they were coin clipping in Rome. I'm without a doubt in my mind they were coin clipping in Rome. So by the by the 13th century, there's political and social tensions between the lords and noblemen and these Jews. They began defaulting on loans. They're losing land due to usury and taxation. And as a result of which, the nobles began to petition their leader at the time, King John, who was the king between 1199 and 1216. They petitioned him to sign the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta had clauses in it which it canceled moneylenders' bonds and it abolished usury. But unfortunately, during Henry III's reign in 1219 to 1272, 19 of the clauses which affected Jews and their ability to engage in usury um, were abolished the following year. So Edward the First passed statutes He reigned from 1272 to 1307. He passed statutes in 1233 and 1275 to abolish usury. And in 1290, he expelled all 16,511 Jews.
Why didn't they? How does it get this bad? Because it's not like back in the day they had, spying devices on everything you own and like actual control over your devices. How come it takes them so long to go and decide this? Like it seems like somebody in their own party, like um the English or whoever, the non-Jews, were selling out their own people as well.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if certain nobles were doing business with them at the time, assuming that they could get ahead on their competitors.
But why don't
And
why don't white people or whoever the English were, why don't they have the same tribalism that like the Jews
that's what I
seem to
was
have?
that's what I was going to get into. I
Okay.
believe, um, as you were discussing that, that's the direction I felt was necessary to discuss. That they're united by their faith and by um their their kin. They were often um cousins, first cousins. According to certain scholars, if you look at the people that are the Ashkenazi Jews, they descend from 300 people. Or was it the Khazarians? I think it was the Ashkenazi. They descend from 300 people. So from a very small group of people, again, marrying one's cousins and a great degree of inbreeding, they're united under a common thought and family lineages.
But doesn't that cause like that severe inbreeding? Doesn't that cause like so many mental deficiencies? How do they seem
Well,
to be able to create these ruses?
so if you look at them, um, it's quite evident they have physical deformations at times. They can look kind of funny, very large noses, very large ears. And then you have the propensity for schizophrenia, as we discussed. These things are a result of this genetic inbreeding.
I also
But
learned, sorry. So
no,
I
go ahead.
also learned, and this was just a 4chan post. It was like some study that's, I should have saved it, but it was something about like it was an actual like scientific study about how like incest, um, like the inbreeding, the, what are the maladies of it are like not present in every generation. So like I think it was like by the third or fourth generation of it that it like um breeds out. There was something about like the incest, I don't know, not being as uh detrimental to genetics. So I don't know if maybe that's where it
No,
comes from or
I believe this is the case because when you consider the fact that this also transpires in small communities in the Himalayas and small communities in the Middle East or South America or in the Amazon, where these people are essentially all related, and they don't have physical and mental retardation or handicaps um, in great numbers in their people. Their people tend to be um, healthy, more or less, but they do develop certain distinct physical characteristics. Like, were you to visit a small, remote Aboriginal people in the rainforest of the Amazon, you'd find that they all kind of look alike, and you could tell they're all related. And you know, not to not to be silly, but you could spot a Jew. Like certain people, you look at them, it's like, that guy's probably Jewish based on some of the physical characteristics that they possess. A particular, I believe it's called aquiline, which is an eagle-like nose, which has a very prominent hook on the end of it, um, large ears. These individuals tend to need corrective lenses or glasses as a result of having poor eyesight, which is again genetic. So I do very much believe that there's a reason that
But what is it with like so yeah, that's like the stereotype, but then you have also when we were talking about the Israelis how they can look like anybody and they don't have a true lineage. So how do those people get tied in to the people that are so inbred like
well they do marry their way into um, prominent families when able. They like to go straight to the top in the sense that they take the Karen approach. Let me speak to your manager. They don't mingle with the people that are of the kingdom. They make their best effort to find out who is influential, and through pooling their resources together, they will purchase influence or buy into a certain family. The same way that ambassadors of countries tend to just be really, really rich guys who just buy that role within the government. Um, in the same manner, they buy favor within the kingdom. They lend the kingdom money, and then within a short amount of time, or long amount of time, depending what's necessary, they subvert and eventually take over.
but I mean I kind of understand what you're saying is that maybe they
So
buy into
that's
these ethnic
that's how
groups.
we have Mizrahi Jews, who are the Jews of um, the Middle East and the Levant. That's like Jews from Israel, more or less, or Arabic Jews. And then you have Sephardic Jews, um, Jews who are of Spanish or Iberian mixed blood. So they're not necessarily as strongly genetically related to the Levant. They have quote unquote Hispanic blood. They're more closely related genetically in their genomes to the people of the Iberian Peninsula. And as we were discussing on your show yesterday, there's Moroccan Jews, and Jews have made their way to the entire um, scope of North Africa, all the coastal areas of the Mediterranean, um, and as we discussed, up and into England. They didn't make their way much farther north um, than England at this particular time. Like they didn't work their way up in up into Scotland. They didn't work their way up into Norway or Sweden because they were repelled by by the individuals that ended up kind of settling in what is currently Scotland and Ireland. The Scots being mainly descendants of Vikings who had settled the Isles. So their ability to blend into a community or begin to resemble the community in which they inhabit, it usually occurred over time, and as a result of using using coin for influence. So in 1290, 16,500 Jews were expelled from England. But the king allowed them to leave with their possessions um, after paying a tax. After which began the glorious Middle Ages of England. Um, what you'll find is that if you search up the English glorious Middle Ages or the glorious Middle Ages of England, you'll find that between 1290 and 1485, um, England flourished. Similarly, when we discuss Spain, you'll find that the Spanish Golden Age began in 1492 after Queen Isabella um, expelled the Jews from her lands. So the English Golden Age or glorious Middle Age, as it can be known, um, it began with the use of tally sticks for for measuring financial transactions. And they had an interest-free system, which allowed there was moderate taxation, but it wasn't uh, necessarily a burden on the people. It doesn't give details as to where um, this taxation ranged at what number, but it's said that there was no state debt and that there was widespread prosperity. A lot of this information that I'm going to be sharing in terms of the financial and historical information, not necessarily the talk of ritual child sacrifice, but these the financial history of England can be found in the book Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mitford something. I'm drawing a blank on it right now. But it's Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind. That's where a lot of this information can be sourced. So tally sticks were made of wood, like hazel or willow, and they were split to prevent forgeries, and they were used to finance state expenditures, um, infrastructure, and by 1694, $17 million worth of tallies were in circulation. So to give you an idea, at the time, the king's annual budget was 2.5 million. So although they were using wooden sticks, the fact that each piece of wood is unique
I
and
see how that works. Okay.
It prevented the ability for people to engage in forgery, and it kept things quite simple, so to speak. So at the time, we're talking, I believe, 1694 again ish. The system supported such a high quality standard of living for the people that laborers and people engaging in in labor. I don't know if this specifically applies to serfs or tradesmen, but they worked roughly 14 weeks out of the year, enjoying 100 to 100, 160 to 180 holidays, and having a purchasing power that was unmatched until the late 19th century. Land ownership was common. They called it copyhold land ownership, and it granted farmers legal rights and access to common lands. And this prosperity allowed craftsmen um, and men of the guilds um, to have time to build some of the magnificent cathedrals that we see. Other people will tell you it was angels in Tartaria, but um, when you consider that these individuals had quite a bit of time on their hands, 180 to 160 holidays out of the year, if they were men of God and devoted to God, they would happily spend their time working on these projects.
So my issue there with the cathedrals, um, kind of, maybe we discussed this before, or maybe I was listening to someone else and envisioned I had a conversation with them about the cathedrals. Like I was listening to Tom Woods, and he was making the argument, or someone was making the argument with him about how they aren't really financially, like, they're not, they're not a financial investment. Like these giant churches are not a financial investment. But then my point was, when I was thinking about that, I was like, actually they are. It's a long-term game plan to basically bring in new converts and gather people in, and is kind of amount to like idol worship to me. And like, because you don't just build these masterful like works of art that like, I don't I don't foresee Jesus being there. And like, if someone started building a giant monument like this, because that's kind of what a church is, in the sense that they're building, being like, yeah, go for it, guys, this is really important, like I really need these ornate stained glass, like giant um like
Gilded statues
altars,
and
yeah,
right.
and stuff like that. And I don't know if that was like, as you're saying this, it kind of seems like that was their way to, like, maybe some of them didn't get thrown out and kind of were there to kind of bring in a little bit of this paganism back in and kind of reel you back into what eventually became like these Catholic churches that we know. Well, at
Sure.
least in my opinion, I think maybe in your opinion, are kind of like this Jesuit order, and very much tied into what Judaism is. It's like Catholicism, in my opinion, has a lot of pagan elements.
It it does, and that's where we can get into the idea that some kings were good men and honest men of good lines, and some of these kings may have been individuals who had connections to old families, and maybe they became initiates into um, mystery schools. So the mystery schools, according to the practitioners and followers, go back to the time of Egypt. So although um, Freemasonry is somewhat more of a modern institution, according to Freemasons, it goes back to Solomon and the building of the temple. And as we mentioned, Solomon practiced summoning demons. According to the Zohar, he had a jar which he kept 72 demons in, and at night he would summon the Shamir, a worm-like demon, which would do the building for him um, in order to make a vast amount of progress in a short amount of time. But these things, again, they're debatable. But in terms of the mystery schools and whether these cathedrals and buildings were built with these symbols in mind, yes, under many instances, this is the case. I believe it's René Le Chateau um, in France has many esoteric and occult um, visuals built into the carvings. It has sacred geometry built into the structure itself. So they many of these kings and families were practitioners and adepts, but they also could have been practitioners of Christianity and saw Christianity as another way to engage in this sort of worship, but they may have inverted it, which is what we kind of see today with like the Catholic Church, where they take teachings and they just invert them and they worship Satan.
And also thinking about with we're on the topic of England. What's your opinion on Stonehenge? Since that was, according to on Wikipedia, they believe that it was 4 to 3,000 BC.
So I would say that it was um, likely built with the help of giants and or their fathers, the fallen angels. I would say that fallen angels weren't necessarily involved, and it was more likely their offspring. If fallen angels were involved, I would think that it would have somewhat of a more appealing on the eye um, layout. Its structure would be more um, visually appealing or beautiful in some fashion. Like if you look at the structures which are found in India or across Southeast Asia, for instance, Angkor Wat. Um, these were buildings that were built with the help of fallen angels, in my opinion.
Do you believe that timeline of 4,000 BC or 3,000 BC?
Uh, could be, you know, I don't necessarily get hung up too much on timelines in discussing when structures were built because I do not believe um, the people that are relaying this information are giving us accurate data. So there's a school of thought that the Bible states that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. There's other people that believe that could be 6 million years old, and that each day is, you know, an eon or uh, a cycle in on God's calendar, not necessarily man's. So to say was it built 3 or 4 thousand years ago? I don't know. I really don't.
I was just kind of trying to relate it to since it was a lot of like moon worship and it's kind of a calendar there. Is
Yes, it's very, very much a calendar. And as we stated before, um, in the previous discussion, and I'll just briefly go over it, there were fallen angels who came down, and Shamsiel taught them the signs of the sun. Arakiel taught them the signs of the earth. Sariel taught them the course of the moon. Kokabel taught them knowledge of the constellations. Barakel taught them astrology. So they had a, a framework. And with that knowledge in mind, built Stonehenge.
do you think also um, do you think that these, for instance, like, okay, let's put that thought into the air that Stonehenge was put there way before a lot of what the modern day English Germanic tribes and then these Jewish lineages got there. Do you think that there's like monuments all over the world that are set up thousands a year ago that draw these tribes to them? Is there anything that talks about that?
Oh, yes, I believe very much so that there's reasons that they like these particular places because it's evidence of their ancestry or their gods, the individuals that worship, which is why they set up in places um, like England and they put down roots on the British Isles. I believe that there's a good reason that they they set up shop there, whether it's the Rothschild banking family or viewing it from the view of the Phoenicians. Many believe that the Phoenicians were the Jews, or the Jews were the Phoenicians, depending on how you look at it, and that when um, some of them left the Levant, they were aware of what was outside the Straits of Gibraltar, and they went and set up in England and eventually the West in the United States and America because they were conscious of its um, geographical strategic advantages. England being on the far west um, of Europe and on an island, making it difficult to invade. And then, as we know, the United States and its geographical advantages that it possesses. So there is a great reason that they set up in these particular locations because not only is there evidence of the fallen angels or their ancestors, depending on how you believe what you believe, how you view it. Um, but there's some say ley lines and energy points on the earth. That's why certain things are built and are there to mirror the heavens, like as above, so below, which is why pyramids in the shape of lights felt because the fallen came down and told them that's where we came from. And as we discussed in conversations we had,
What about like Columbus? Like they were, the new thing is that Columbus was Jewish, and so like he basically sought out to go to both the places that he claimed he was going to, or where he actually went, and then where he claimed he was going to, had huge, enormous monuments as well.
and that is very much a school of thought. There are certain people believe that um, the monuments that could be found in Washington, D.C., there's the monuments that could be found in Chicago at the time of the Chicago World's Fair, or some of the even the temples in the LDS Church were here in the United States when the people arrived.
Do you do
And
you
that
do you have a map of where these 200 angels came down to, or is there any kind of source as to where their locations were?
According to the Book of Enoch, they landed on Mount Hermon, which is in the Middle East, in modern day Israel, in between it's in the Golan Heights, in between I believe it's Syria and and modern day or occupied Palestine or Israel for that matter. But one need only look at the major um, ancient religions scattered throughout the world, and you could see where they touch down. Mexico and what is considered Mexico City for and Quetzalcoatl. They also touched down on the Yucatan Peninsula and created the Mayan civilizations with Kukulkan. They touched down in India. They touched down in Greece. So they allegedly,
Did they
according to the
come
book of,
down to people that were already settled there and then they took over?
yes, that's the idea that
Okay.
there were people, but these people didn't necessarily, according to some schools of thought, have a very advanced or any really advanced um, culture. This is why individuals in the mystery school um, worship and venerate Lucifer because they believe that he gifted man um, knowledge in the same manner that Prometheus did by giving them fire, the spark of divinity, by teaching them the arts, um, the ability to build and craft and make medicine from plants and roots. But prior to that, man lived in their mind primitively as more or less hunter gatherer and and as savages, but I don't necessarily adhere to that 100%, but it is fair to say that people weren't as organized, they weren't building structures because um they weren't given this knowledge.
Well, because the irony too is of like the what we know as modern plumbing and like toiletry was created in India, and somehow they must have forgotten that knowledge. But like, um, and I think that was created early BC. Like they had already had it, I think in like 1200 BC. I don't remember. I took a course in India and I completely forgot, but they had it like for a substantial amount of time. What was the date around that these angels spread out? Do you know?
It would be according to the Bible and the book of Enoch in the days of Jared. So Jared being Enoch's father. And I assume that's roughly 2000-ish years, 1500 years after
Okay, so Jared is from 2582 BC to 3544. Okay, so that could uh, line up.
very much so. According to um the book of Enoch and the Bible, this is when the fallen angels came down. So the fallen had came down, taught man these things. They worship them in some places and in others. And this is, I'll just briefly just discuss this as a bit of a non sequitur. This is why we see alliances between countries like India and Israel and Mexico, where these people may, on appearance, or on the surface level appear to have no particular um, relations to one another. But if you consider the fact that they are quite aware that their societies were built by the fallen,
I mean, you could make the argument that like there is a it's much it's much like the Jews don't have like a like we have a stereotype, but we don't have a central true phenotype if we don't know their lineage. But there is a spiritual battle that goes through like if you're possessed by one of these, you know, this evil mindsets and what creates these cultures that are known for the same kind of like either usury or trickery or like for instance like the Mexican government is very corrupt, and we now have a uh, Jewish leader there. We have
bang.
India is very much like uh, they're known for trickery and stuff like that, and a lot of child sacrifice. Then you have China, like what's his name, Dustin Nemos was actually talking about how the Chinese Jews. He brought up that book because someone was like kind of joking around about like Chinese people being Jews, and there are like Chinese people really uh, like Jews and like their practices. Um, and it kind of coincides with like this devil's bargain where like you get this, I don't know about cultural enrichment, but you get a like a monetary gain, and your civilizations flourish at the behest of like your humanity and your nature.
And
And
by engaging in these pacts and um these alliances, they whether it be through greed or knowledge that they're returning to their old religious roots or the roots of the ancestors, they're conscious of what it is they're doing. The Chinese and the dragon, Mexico, the feathered serpent, in Australia, it's the rainbow serpent. So the correlation and understanding is is held by these countries, and they're aware that they're on the same team, hence these alliances. So we were we were discussing
you're in
the
Spain.
English, yeah, we were discussing the English Golden Age, and I wanted to transition that into Spain. So as I as I was saying, the people of England were prospering and they were doing quite well, but unfortunately, this golden era ended in the 17th century with the reintroduction of usury and the return of Jewish moneylenders who had been expelled from Spain in 1492 during um, the reign of Queen Isabella. So
Elizabeth in your notes.
uh, I believe that was pertaining to during Queen Elizabeth I's reign. Marano Jews in London practice as goldsmiths. So that was discussing some of the
Okay.
the the Jewish things that transpired after the 17th century, after the return of Jews to England. But in Spain, in uh, in 711, the year 711, uh, according to chronicles by the Christian um, Lucas de Tuy in his book Chronicon Mundi in 1236, Jews opened gates of Toledo, Toledo being city in southern Spain, a walled city, and because of their the Jews felt persecuted by um, these evil Christians and these evil kings. I believe at the time it was a Visigoth king, so I don't know much about King Roderick, whether he was Christian. I didn't look much more into that. But the idea was that they felt they were getting the short end of the stick by the kingdom and felt it was in their best interest to allow the Muslims in to overthrow um, the current king. And as a result of which, forget the name of the Muslim conquest, Tariq ibn Zaid. They took over a significant amount of time. So I didn't detail when the Islamists and the people of Islam were expelled. Uh, I should have put some of that in my notes, but just for the sake of this, um, let's discuss something that happened in 1250, and this does briefly harken back to the idea of ritual child sacrifice. In 1250 AD, Jews of Saragossa adopted the dogma, the idea that everyone who delivered a Christian child for sacrifice would be freed from all taxes and debts. And Moses Albai Huzet, or Huzet, also called Alba Huseto, delivered a 7-year-old boy, Domenico del Val, to the Jews for crucifixion. So this is another instance in which, after being allowed back into society and making their way back within the walls and and good graces of the people, they again engage in ritual child murder and sacrifice.
You know, in Spain they have a thing, or I'm sorry, in Mexico they have a thing where guys will voluntarily crucify themselves every year, and it's very Catholic. I don't know if you are aware of that or if you've seen that before.
I actually have not, and I
You
find that
should see that. There's guys that are really famous. They're like rock stars in this, where they get themselves crucified, and they'll actually put the nails through their hands, and they do it every year. I don't know when it is, but obviously you know that Mexico's heavily Catholic.
Mhm.
Um, it's kind of interesting that you got a very Spanish civilization that's been brought Catholicism, and as we've talked about, it's kind of a little bit of a pagan roots, and the you know crucifixion is not something that I would really celebrate.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. The thought that um, I wouldn't want to say they're necessarily glorifying it, but they, for whatever reason, um, feel the need to partake of it, display it for all to see, and like as I forget the exact quote in the Bible, but the idea is you you do good works when the Lord, when no one's looking, so to be that guy that's going out there getting crucified, you put it well. He's almost doing it for rock star type veneration rather than for the purpose of glorifying God.
And oddly enough, these people also sacrifice chickens through cockfighting.
Very interesting.
And
And then
also
the
the bullfighting.
bulls, yeah, they're sacrificing bulls as well. This is a very astute observation. I like that. It's interesting that we find those two practices and can also be found in Spain, um, particularly bullfighting.
And you know who else also there I meant to ask you is if you believe about those mummies being like it could either be somebody from our timeline, like our past century that was smuggling coke, or there's
Cocaine
maybe
mummies in Egypt.
cocaine mummies.
Yeah.
And
See
it'd be
that,
interesting, whether people were actually making the trip across the ocean like that.
and this gets into the idea of the Phoenicians and the fact that Phoenicians, being a seafaring people who were conscious of the Americas, um, people believe that they were the ones responsible for the Copper Age because there's no extensive copper reserves found in Europe, at least at the scale to be attributed to the age of copper. And some people will have, you know, contentions by me saying this, but there's ideas that the Egyptians and the people of the Levant in this particular area were blonde hair and blue eyes. They were very much Caucasian, and that copper colored skin that they possessed was to prevent themselves from getting sunburned. So they placed um, a, a powder form of copper mixed with oil on their skin or mixed with turned into a paste. Hence the use of the modern day sunscreen named Copper Tone. So that could just be coincidence, but there is an idea that these individuals on these civilizations were traveling to the Americas and mining copper and bringing it back to particularly Egypt,
You know what copper is also good for?
conductor of electricity.
Well, antiviral medicines.
I wasn't aware of that.
Um,
I would not be surprised being they were conscious of the ability to make tinctures, concoctions, and use of medicine through roots and plants, which was taught to them by the fallen angels.
okay, I'll let you keep going. I didn't want to pull you
No,
off too far from that.
little non sequitur never hurts. So in 1391, the beginning of problems for the Jews began occurring in Spain. The Spanish rulers at the time, mind you, Spain isn't necessarily uh, or the Iberian Peninsula isn't necessarily united as a whole. But Spanish rulers began recognizing the subversive threat of Jews and understanding what had transpired in England. I'm sure they had a certain degree of knowledge of history. And what they did was they banned Jews from their kingdom and required all Jews to convert to Christianity, uh, Catholicism, or be exiled. So this is the foundation of the idea that about 160 70 or 150 some odd years later, um, these conversos, or the sons of these conversos who were still practicing Judaism in secret, went on to found the order of the Jesuits in order to subvert and eventually take over and control the Catholic Church. So we're going to mention an individual who would later go on to become a influential member of the church in Spain. He's a gentleman who was born to a Jew by the name of Shlomo Halevi, a Jew who had converted to Catholicism just before 1391 and the anti-Jewish pogroms that would subsequently follow. He was originally a rabbi and quite a prominent Jewish scholar in the Jewish community. But what he did was he converted to Christianity, again, just before the 1391 mandates. And he went on to become the Bishop of Cartagena and later uh, Burgos or Burgos, leveraging his positions within the church. He exerted a large degree of influence. It should also be noted that his wife remained openly Jewish and never converted to Christianity, which is one of the examples which are given later on for the people who were of true Spanish or Portuguese, depending on the region, descent, who held apprehensions toward the Jews who were conversos. And this information is thoroughly discussed in the book, The Jesuit Order as a Synagogue of Jews and Purity of Bloodline Laws in the Early Society of Jesus by Robert Alexander Maricus. So, just for the sake of context, I think it's important to just discuss who Robert Alexander Maricus is and where some of this information was sourced. He's a Jesuit scholar who teaches, if I'm not mistaken, at the Fordham School, which is a Jesuit college. He's, if I'm not mistaken, a tenured professor. I did watch a discussion that he held with a Jewish community organization that's seeking to revisit the history of Jews in medieval times, and for the sake of this conversation, particularly the early Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, as it's also known. So he also teaches as an associate professor at a yeshiva. So he is a Jesuit scholar, Jesuit himself, as well as a man who's fond of the Jews. So some of this information that's presented, he does do his part to present it in a fashion that's bipartisan. He will discuss the anti-Jewish sentiments as well as uh, the pro-Jewish influences on the early Society of Jesus. So, Cartagena had a son, Alonso de Cartagena, and he would go on to be quite influential in the Jesuit order. He was a learned scholar again. He had translated Cicero and another man from the classical schools of thought, Seneca, into Castilian, and his intellectual reputation um, was was quite known in the area. As a result of this, he gained um, positions of influence like his father. He went on to later write a book, Defensorium, and the purpose of that book was to present a case which would um, paint Jews in a positive light
Do you
because
have any opinion on Cicero?
I'm actually not quite familiar with his body of work. I know the name. I know he was, if I'm not mistaken, of the Greek um, schools of thought.
He he
But
um he documented a lot of what happened with Caesar, and so a lot of people,
so he was in Rome then?
yeah,
Not he was
and
okay. So he wasn't necessarily Greek.
he documented a lot about what happened with Caesar and the fall of it, and basically he was like a lot of people take his accounts for what happened. So my opinion of Cicero was not positive when I first heard about him because I was reading a book by Michael Parenti about Caesar, and uh, basically he was kind of a propagandist. But then now what I'm hearing today, and it's a lot of like Catholic circles and right wingers really celebrate Cicero. And I'm wondering if this Cartagena guy is through his positive, like he could have positively uh, portrayed Cicero in his
100%.
translations. And I'm
You would
wondering,
think so as a Jew he would do that. I mean, I don't want to cast aspersions, but as you view the man, he was quite dubious and was a propagandist. It would make sense that a converso and a fake Catholic would translate the work of Cicero, but frame it in a manner that painted him in a positive light to the people. 100%. Um,
so you're
one of the
talking,
things, no, you're good. One of the things he had said, Alonso de Cartagena, is that the notions of Jews as a chosen people was a misinterpretation because he's trying to not give them too much credit so they don't catch too much heat, so to speak, in my opinion. And he says God's law distinguished people not only by circumcision but by moral conduct. So he's saying it's not just about if you're snipped or not. Um, your moral conduct is what matters. So he ignores the instance in 1250 AD, which he was probably more than aware of Jews adopting the practice of um, taking a child and sacrificing it to be freed from taxes and debts. It sounds as though he was quite subversive in in his actions. So in 1492, um, King Ferdinand and I believe his wife is Isabella, ruling Castile and Aragon, issued the Alhambra decree. and he expelled all unconverted Jews from Spain. This idea was debated for years, and it faced a certain degree of resistance from Ferdinand because it said he was swayed by generous bribes from prosperous unconverted Jews. Um, in in 1420, so this is going to jump back 70 some odd years. Thomas de Torquemada, who was a Dominican friar, served as the first Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition. And the Spanish Inquisition, one of their purposes, along with converting people to Christianity, to acting as agents spreading Catholicism, was to investigate the sincerity of converso conversions, realizing that they did present a potential threat to the kingdom, as noted is what transpired in the book of Esther between Esther and Haman. So at this point, Thomas de Torquemada, and he's quite old. Um, he's 72 years old, and he was aware that the king was apprehensive. He had caught wind that the king had been receiving payments in order to postpone or kick the can down the road, so to speak, regarding um, expelling the Jews. And he managed to gain an opportunity to speak with the king in court, and in a display that's well documented, he, in front of um, the king and his people and the nobles, he threw 30 pieces of silver. No, sorry, he threw a cross at his feet and said, Christ was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Would you betray him just because the reward is higher? And some people say this particular moment was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, because the king had no choice but to move, because otherwise he would have um, garnered great resentment from the individuals and the nobles who resided under him. So Cartagena's defensorium argument fails to prevent the expulsion, and the Jews are expelled. And this gets into 1492. Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, as you previously stated, and he was aware of the Americas. He knew where he was going, and this gets into the idea that Jews, having relation to the Phoenicians, being from the Levant, were aware of the Americas. So we're going to jump forward just a little bit. In 1539, Ignatius of Loyola was born. Around 1491, some say. We're going to discuss between 1539 and 15. Maybe that date's not good. Don't worry about that. Ignatius Loyola is born in 1491 in the Basque region. He is the founding member and face of the founding of the Order of Jesuits. He was one of 5 other individuals all of which were conversos or the sons of conversos who would go on to establish that order. Some say it's debated, and it's debatable. I disagree, but it is known that his father converted to Catholicism, but as I've stated on numerous occasions, Jews don't convert, they subvert, um, particularly when forced, knowing that Jews were forced to convert in 1391. It's important that that distinction is made, which is why it was discussed. So his father was a religious man who was a former soldier, and after a spiritual conversion in the 1520s became quite religious. The Society of Jesus was officially established in 1540 with the blessing of Pope Paul III's edict or bull known as Regimini Militanis Ecclesiae. And it served as a platform for conversos who secretly practiced Judaism to infiltrate the church. So
That's the black pope, right? That's in South America.
the Black Pope is the leader of the Jesuit order, according to many people in the work that we do. The Jesuit order now controls the Vatican, and it's no longer Pope holds the reins. And if you just look at the last Pope prior to the current one, it's just put into office, he was the first outwardly Jesuit Pope. Popes, I'm sure, were secretly Jesuits, but I forget the gentleman's name. I think he was from Argentina, but he was the first outwardly open Jesuit. So Jews versus outwardly practicing Catholicism or members of a secret society begin finding themselves in quite influential positions within the church. Another key converso figure included Diego Lainez, who was born around 1512 in Castile. He was a theologian and a very close companion of Loyola. There's Juan Alfonso de Boulogne, born around 1517, who served as Loyola's secretary. I beg your pardon. So both Lainez and Polanco were Jews, acting as conversos, and became a part of the core of what established the Order of the Jesuits. So between 1558 and 1565, Lainez served as the second superior general of the Jesuit order, succeeding Loyola. Okay. And his leadership was marked and highlighted by contributions that he made to the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent was a meeting that was held in the city of Trent to discuss, if I'm not mistaken, uh, certain edicts, principles, and practices which would become canon in the Catholic Church. Um, I'm not sure exactly what year it was implemented that the priesthood weren't allowed to take wives, but it could have transpired at the Council of Trent. Um, that being a major distinction between all the other um, Christian churches. Catholicism is the only Christian faith which does not permit its priesthood to take wives.
So that's where that started.
I I can't say 100%. I didn't write that down in my notes, but I do believe many other um, ideas and frameworks for the church were set into place at this time.
Is this
And keep
also
in
when they
mind
started with the castrados?
that's a good question. Would you mind pulling up the Council of Trent so we could briefly discuss it in a little bit more detail? I
Okay.
didn't find it was necessarily pertinent to what I was hoping to get into, but I think just for the sake of this, I think it is necessary, being Linez's influence as the superior general of the Jesuit order and his contributions to the council.
Okay. So Council of Trent. Let me look at it.
So there's actually quite a few um, times later on where the
Oh,
Jesuits
oh,
and these
hold on.
conversos. Go ahead.
So there is a thing in 1857. Pope Pius 1X. Is that the
Ninth.
15th, ninth? Okay. Um, that following the spirit of Council of Trent's decree on avoiding lasciviousness, ordered that hundreds of male statues in the Vatican be castrated by removing their genitalia, is known as the Great Castration. But what I was talking about was where they would like a lot of they
Castratos castrating men for the sake of
yeah,
making them sing.
yeah.
In opera, there's uh, a voice called castrato, and they would essentially castrate the men so that they would maintain their uh, their feminine or high pitch vocal range. And some
It's just a
people
way
say
of
that,
child sacrifice is what I was leading
oh,
into.
oh, and you're 100% correct. And some say that Michael Jackson was actually a victim of this by his father, and that he was a castrato. So it is a form of uh, of sacrifice in the same manner where people like Dwayne Wade sacrifice their child and make their child transgender and chop their dick off and give them tits. But I don't want to get into too much of a digression. But I appreciate that context. That was fun. Um, so Linez becomes extremely influential. He's the individual representing the Catholic Church at the Council of Trent. Um, Alfonso de Polanco, his friend, played another critical role in developing the order's organizational structure. Again, he was a secretary under Loyola, and he was good at organization. He was good at administrative skills. He was um, astute in that regard. So he will go on to develop what we see in terms of placing certain people of influence into positions of respective power. For instance, Why be the mayor of a city when you can be the treasurer? The treasurer is the one that writes the checks and pulls the purse strings. The mayor just is a figurehead and a talking head and more of a stooge and a clown. Someone who's supposed to look pretty and talk well. But the individuals with the power are the people with the purse strings. So you'll often see that being the case where they move from one position to the next based on their understanding of where they can have the most influence and impact on the structure of the society. So there's another converso by the name of Sistine Madonna, and Pedro Ribadeneyra, born around 1527, who was a prolific writer and preacher, and Geronimo Nadal, born around 1507, um, key missionary and organizers of the church that held influential positions, advancing the Jewish agenda within the church. By 1573, anti-converso sentiment grew within the order as Christians began recognizing what was transpiring around them with versos gaining quite influential seats of position. And Everard Mercurian, the new superior general, began reducing converso influence by implementing what became purity of blood laws known as limpieza de sangre. So, like clean blood laws, more or less, if you were to translate that. So, from what I understand, they would go back roughly 5 generations, and you needed to be able to prove and verify that you weren't in any way, shape, or form uh, Jewish for 5 generations to be brought into the fold and made a member of the order. So in 1593, the fifth general congregation of the Jesuits, under pressure from, in particular, Claudio Acquaviva, no relation to the Cologne, uh, was born around 1543 and became the general from 1581 to 1615. He adopted and implemented purity of blood statutes, barring all candidates with Jewish ancestry up to 5 years from joining the order. Aquaviva was a staunch supporter of these restrictions, and he aimed to counter what the Jews were doing in Spain and in Portugal under Catholicism. And by 1608, the purity of blood laws were fully entrenched within the Jesuit order, excluding conversos who secretly practiced Judaism. But the idea being they could only go back as far as 5 generations. And at this particular point in time, the the law again was passed in 1391. So it's fair to say, not long after 1608, Jews began influencing and making their way back into the Catholic Church through the order of the Jesuits. And in time, we find ourselves with the control of the Catholic Church being in the hands of the Jesuits, and the Black Pope being in control of the church. And as stated previously, the last pope was openly a Jesuit. And whenever I speak of Jesuits, it's important, I think, to be conscious that these individuals are Jews. So to kind of sum and wrap this up and put a nice little bow on it, fallen angels came down, uh, taught man enchantments, spells, magic, war, and the arts. Some of these societies flourished. Um, Jews made their way to these places or had um, the help of these kings and queens through intermarrying or buying their way into the families, and within time subverted and controlled these empires. Whether it was through seduction, like Esther, um, purchasing power in England, paying to help a king build up his army to overthrow a particular foe, or through religious subversion and infiltration. Um, Jews had made their way around from one country to the next after expulsion for engaging in ritual child sacrifice and usury. And this sums up this particular portion, which I wanted to cover today, being Spain, England, ritual child sacrifice, and the story of Esther and Haman. And in the next installment, we'll be going over Zionism, uh, its creation and its modern iteration, um, the Federal Reserve, a little bit of the Kalergi plan, and modern Jewry. And I just want to say thank you as always for having me, buddy.
I have a couple questions since
Please.
you were able to get through it all. So going back to that Council of Trent, in 1563, the Council of Trent decreed that religious images should avoid all lasciviousness and that figures should not be painted or adorned in a way that would excite lust. Following this ruling, the use of fig leaves to cover nudity in religious art, inspired by the story of Adam and Eve, became widespread practice. It's kind of funny that like it Adam and Eve, the whole point of them not knowing their like their nakedness, like that was the whole point, and then going and outwardly putting a fig leaf on them is kind of ironic to that. And then and it was done during that Council of Trent that you talked about. And what was the other thing that I was going to say about that?
When were the men not allowed to marry anymore? When did that come about? Could you take a quick little peek at that? Because that's something that, if I can't remember off the top of my head, it might have been around 10 something, 1091. Maybe I'm wrong.
Would that be popes or priests?
Uh, that's a good question.
Okay,
I believe when it was implemented, it
okay. So this was in the Western Church. The requirement of for Catholic priests to be celibate became mandatory with the Second Lateran Council in 1139. While married men could be ordained before this time, the council decreed that once ordained, a priest could not marry. This rule was reconfirmed centuries later at the Council of Trent in 1563.
So it was officially made hard doctrine and discussed in depth at the Council of Trent. So I was slightly correct. And it was first implemented saying that men who were married could join the clergy, but you couldn't get married subsequent to joining the clergy.
And
So,
the other thing I wanted to bring up about that also is um, this avoid lasciviousness, and like the um, kind of what was it? Let's see, um, the idea of like not masturbating or whatever, that like I would assume kind of played into that. Um, would also, it came into play again in America. Do you know the story of Kellogg, like Kellogg
Kellogg's
cereal?
making cereal to stop people from masturbating. Yeah.
And well, his
He was
he was
Seventh Day Adventist, I believe.
he was pushing circumcision. That's
Hmm.
why people in America circumcise, because he pushed that so much and he was trying to get them to not masturbate.
Sounds very much like he was um, a Rockefeller brother and of a certain school of thought because for him to be pushing these ideas, it sounds like he was a follower of good old Schofield Bible and some of the things that it includes because God asks us to be fruitful and multiply, and obviously you're not supposed to lust after your neighbor or um, partake in sexual acts solely for the purpose of pleasure, according to the Bible, or take a sleep with an individual before marriage. But there was good reason for this, and this was to ensure that you were um, choosing a woman of sound stock and sound mind. So Kellogg, I would think, was very much an individual who was from uh,
He had a lot of connections. He apparently liked to. He was a Arabian horse breeder, and had a lot of interaction with Arabs due to that. It'd be interesting to find
to
out
go,
if
mm, where he came up with these particular thoughts because um, many Christian, even Catholic countries do not circumcise, from what I understand. I don't think Mexicans do. They're Catholic. I don't think they circumcise.
yeah.
Eastern Orthodox. Um,
Because I was just learning recently that like there was no need for circumcision
After
after
Christ's
Christ.
sacrifice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's something we had talked about, and I believe there's something to that. Hence, there's no more reason to engage in any other sacrifices for that matter. Jesus was the last sacrifice, and that's why the things that the Jews do on Passover of having the chicken um, take their sins. Um, it's 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 essentially blasphemy at this point, and it's against the commandments that have been given to them. Because with the new covenant, these practices become null void, and they're all thrown out the window.
And before I forget, so I brought up to you when we were talking solo about this codex, this Lailashi codex. Did you have any chance to
I
investigate that at all?
I was able to listen to a little bit of it when working, but her Her
accent
accent
is
is quite it's quite thick, and in order to get a good understanding, I'm going to have to spend some little bit of time with it. But from what I understand, she discusses um, migration of the Jewish people throughout Europe, and that particular codex was found in the mountains of Georgia,
yeah.
which is interesting.
And the reason I'm bringing that up is because we started this conversation about um, the migration from which that would be kind of in the Babylonian era.
Not far, not far. Yeah,
It's just north of the
just
Babylonian
north
era, and then
near Armenia,
it would
which is
match.
where
It would
Armenia is
match
where.
the. Sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was to say Armenia is where Noah's Ark landed on Mount Ararat. So again, not far at all.
So if we're looking, I'm looking at a map right now, and they're coming, let's say, from migrating through northern Iran, through the Babylonian or former Babylonian Empire, up through Georgia, and then you get up to, you start getting into Ukraine-ish area. And isn't that about where the Khazarians were?
100%.
Okay, so then you've got the
So
Khazarians, and then they start moving, and then you've got, when did the Germanic tribes were already there, or
I believe that the Germanic tribes are of the lost 10 tribes that were the ones who were taken into captivity in Assyria, and I believe it was 700 something BC, and they were then scattered. And then the second
so these are the true Jews, you're saying, or
correct.
okay, so the
Correct.
true
I
Jews
do.
were the of the Germanic tribes.
I'm of that belief.
Okay,
There's some people who would call that white supremacy, to say that the Celts and the Visigoths and the Huns um, were of the 10 lost tribes. But I
did
think
so did
evidence.
those tribes practice what we know as what we're talking about with the sacrificial things, or was they, or
So
that's the
at this
false ones?
particular no, at this particular time, they hadn't yet came in contact with Christianity. I would say so. They were still engaging in paganism because they had been spending time in Assyria, and then they were scattered. So they may had prophecies and knowledge based on the fact that they would have had the Old Testament, and the Old Testament foretells of the Messiah and that Jesus would return, but they don't really know what his name is, so to speak. So that's where you get like the idea of Beowulf being
Yes.
very, very similar to Jesus in the manner that you described him. But they venerated Beowulf just because they didn't have any context of who Jesus Christ was.
and and so it's just, it's interesting. So if I'm looking at this map and I'm watching them go into what is the United Kingdom now, and it would kind of explain, I don't know what the if we're looking at the true, if them being the true Jews, and then them being, as you described, the Aryans, um and then that would lead people to possibly believe that the Vikings, or uh I guess barbarians and Vikings are different.
Well, the
um
barbarians are associated with the Barbars, which is the North African coast and what's considered Morocco and Algeria, but they were technically a Caucasian, lighter skinned. They like if you even go there, the people who aren't and haven't been Arabized after the Arab invasion, they have light colored eyes, like greenish bluish eyes you could still find in these regions. Their skin's darkened as a result of the inbreeding with you know Nilotes and people south of the Sahara, sub-Saharan Africans who have made their way up,
Did they
or
travel the coast of northern Africa to get there, or did they go through Europe to get there to
I, I
Morocco?
assume I assume they traveled the Mediterranean via the northern coast of Africa, and then some probably went a little bit skirting the northern route and settled in Greece, or settled in Italy, or settled farther west in the British Isles.
Because they got their
Or
name
it's
Barbar from the Greeks. The Greeks are the ones that gave them the name
that
Barbar.
because I'm sure in the Greeks encountered them. Maybe they trade with them in some capacity. But the idea that they were savages is a later concept. According to certain schools of thought, they were just as civilized as the next man.
Okay. And then we've got
Although they may have been living in tents, much like the Jews did, which is where we get the Bedouins.
and is there any I don't know all these different tribes. I know there was like a map I used to see people arguing with each other on 4chan about like what the true like original groups were. So like Finland is kind of in the middle between Sweden, and then you've got,
To the right of Sweden, yeah, next to Denmark,
but it's kind
a
of the middle between like it could
little
be.
south.
What I'm saying though is like you've got the Swedish were known for like or the Norwegians and Swedish were kind of known more as like Vikings, and that
Hmm.
wasn't so prominent in Finland. And then you've got like, is there a split off between like into Russia? These
Well,
this
technically,
group
that would be the Finns because they're the individuals who have a language which is closely related to a people from the Urals, the Ural Mountains in Russia. So the Finns would be more ethnically diverse, so to speak, from a language perspective, than the Finns, the Danes, and the Norse, who all had a more common culture. The Finns are also closely associated with the Sami, but you find that in Norway as well. The Sami are
because like it's
yeah,
always weird like people don't understand how I tan so quickly. And like they always make fun of like Finnish people for being Mongolians. And like, but I was born actually, I had like blonde hair until I was like 6 years old. And then all of a sudden it started getting darker, like once I started cutting it. And it's kind of a weird culture. I mean, aside from like today, they're fucking weird people, but like it's a weird culture to kind of like figure out their like true roots behind
and
it.
and that's an interesting thing to discuss because according to at least certain schools of thought, I don't know if you've heard of the Bach Saga.
Mm,
Have you heard of the Bach Saga? I believe it's based in Finland, and it it's the idea that Helsinki was at one time at the North Pole, but it wasn't cold. It was an endless summer, and that the story of the Bach Saga
Hello,
can't
everyone. Welcome
be
back to another episode.
sorry.
changed or mutilated because it's based on a mathematical representation where the letters also equal numbers, and should someone alter the Bach Saga, it would be apparent in the breakdown of the in the manner in which the story is arranged. It's a very interesting thought, but it's supposed to tell, according to the Finns and the individual who's presenting this idea, the origin of the Finnish people, and speaks of kind of an idea that Finland or Helsinki, in particular, was kind of the city at the top of the earth when the poles happened to be in that particular area, and it was an endless, um, everlasting sun that never went down, almost like the Garden of Eden, so to speak.
I'll definitely have to check that in because that is cool. Um, Slav wanted to ask in the chat. He said, "Do we have any uh, thoughts on the whole Idaho situation and being anniversary of the Aryan Inferno?" I don't know anything about the Aryan Inferno. The sheriff was trained by Mossad and Shin Bet.
Oh
I
shit.
I will
We'll have
say
to look into
though,
that.
if you recall, actually, you may have not been there for this, Slav, but that Jinza group that I've been talking about, they're the ones that organize those trips for the sheriffs and these military these not military, I guess military and SWAT teams and local police departments, mainly of large um, towns and cities, get taken over there by Jinza. That's Jinsa. Um, Let me fucking remember what that
I wasn't
stands
aware that
for.
it was Jinsa that was organizing that.
Yeah, because remember in the YouTube page, when I had brought it up and I had the guy, they
Jewish International Security of America or something along those
yeah,
lines.
which is such an odd name to have for a group. It's like why is why are Jewish people uh, for the national security of America? But they were talking, I think, in their introductory video about how, and that Michael Makovsky guy that I've been honing on,
Hmm.
that was responsible partly for the Iraq War, that, that he was touting about how they are the ones that make these trips. Yeah, I believe it is when you go into their page for the Jinza thing on like their first like introductory like on their page, that video they start saying like describing who they are and what they do and how they like try to like bring like what is it like cultural relations um between Jews and like getting people to understand like the greatness of Judaism and all that, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
that's what they were doing in that. Um but no, I don't know. I only saw just a little bit about that they had a sniper situation in Idaho. I barely saw that before the stream started.
Ruby
Uh,
Ridge was Idaho, no?
was it? I thought Ruby
Was that
Ridge.
Montana?
I thought Ruby Ridge was in Washington. Where was Ruby Ridge?
Well, we do know that
Oh, it was Idaho. Yes, you're right.
um Mossad is training NYPD, the people behind the the No Kings movement, aside from the Waltons, is a Jewish couple who are outwardly communists, and they owned a company called Indivisible prior to this No Kings protests. They are again responsible for organizing paid protesters and civil unrest, um, and they're communists, and they're taking money from the Waltons, old families that probably go back to God knows where, Babylon, Syria, or Jews in Levant. And they pop up from time to time and say, "Oh, this person just got really rich because their grandpapa was a smart man." When in reality, these people are backed by older banking families who prefer to stay out of the spotlight, and they allow these other families to get a leg up should they play ball and dance accordingly.
What reality
Sorry, I just wanted to
No, you're good.
put this into my history, and it automatically plays these things. But it is too much of this stuff is just too coincidental when they do all this stuff. Like Janet Reno, I believe, was involved in Waco and Ruby Ridge, and that fucking, what was it? That kid, she was a major player in that what's the Elian Gonzalez? It was like a
Oh,
giant
and then we
fucking,
got Jolly West, the psyop guy, who's a hypnotist and involved in Manson, and I think Jack Ruby, and um, bunch of serial killers. He was an MK Ultra guy. So there's the chief of Metro Las Vegas. He was like the emergencies coordinator person. He oversaw the Las Vegas shooting and the
yeah.
fire in Lahaina. And it, they always have these particular people that show up at particular times, like Fauci and COVID. He was also involved in AIDS and AZT. I mean, these people, these families, these groups, they're all connected, and in my opinion, they're all followers of Satan, Lucifer, Saturn, uh, Shiva, or one iteration or the other of the dark forces that plague this world, that are in direct opposition to Jesus and our God, our Heavenly Father, who's written what the outcome will be, but they've chosen a side, and we've chose ours.
Um, fuck. What was I gonna say? These. Okay. Damn it! I forgot what I was gonna say.
I want to thank everyone who came out tonight and participated and made comments and listened, and um, I very much enjoy doing these, and looking forward to next week.
Definitely. Do you want to chat a little bit after?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to end the stream. Appreciate you guys, as Jared said. It was really fun. Once we get the ball rolling, I think we have some good chemistry and really start getting into some good topics. Um, so I know sometimes it starts out a little slow because we got to kind of get our rhythm, but like it definitely picked up. I learned a shit ton. I got more to study about this Bach thing that you were talking about. Um, that was
Box
pretty cool.
Saga.
Bach
Yes, sir.
Saga. So I made sure I got a video in my YouTube history to watch later. Um, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it for your tonight. I appreciate you guys watching, and if you wouldn't mind liking the stream, that'll help spread what we're talking about until I meet my ultimate demise, which will be a permanent suspension from YouTube from flying too close to the sun. But all right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the stream, and I'll chat with Jared a little bit.